position can be summed up in a drop of blood. Show me a teaspoon of blood, and I will reveal to thee the ineffable nature of the cosmos, naked and squirming. Squirming. Funny how the truth always seems to do that when you shine a light on it. A man came to my door one afternoon, back when I lived on a rambling farm in eastern Washington. He was sniffing around, poking into things best left unpoked. A man with a flashlight, you might say. Of course, I knew who he was and what he was doing long before we arrived, with his hat in one hand and his phony story in the other. Claimed he was a state property assessor, did the big genial man. Indeed, he was a massive fellow, thick, blunt fingers clutching corroborative documents and lumpy from all of the abuse he had subjected them to in the military. He draped an ill-tailored tweed jacket in insufferable slacks over his ponderous frame. This had the effect of making him look like a man that should have been on a beach with a sun visor and a metal detector. The man wore a big smile under his grizzous beard. This smile frightened people. He spoke slowly, in big, heavy voice, that sounded as if it had emerged from a cast-iron barrel. He smelled of cologne and 3-in-1 oil. I could have whispered to him that the cologne came from a fancy emerald-coloured bottle that his wife had purchased for him for his birthday as a present, that he carried the bottle in his travel bag and spritzed himself whenever he was on the road and in too great of a hurry, or simply too hungover for a shower. He preferred scotch, did my strapping visitor. I could have mentioned several other notable items in his patent leather travel bag: a roll of electrical tape, brass knuckles, voltmeter, police issue handcuffs, a micro recorder, a pocket camera, disposable latex gloves, lockpicks, a carpet cutter, flashlight, an empty aspirin bottle, toothpaste, half a roll of antacid tablets, hemorrhoid suppositories, and a stained road map of the Washington state. The bag was far away on the front seat of his rented sedan, which he had carefully parked up on the winding dirt driveway under a sprawling locust tree. Wisely, he had decided to reconnoitre the area before knocking on the door. The oil smell emanated from a lubricated and expertly maintained .38 caliber revolver stowed in his left-hand jacket pocket. The pistol had not been fired in 3.5 years. The man did not normally carry a gun on the job, but in my case he had opted for discretion. It occurred to him that I might be dangerous. I could have told him all of these things and that he was correct in his assumptions, but it did not amuse me to do so. Besides, despite his bulk, he looked pretty fast and I was tired. Winter makes me lazy. It makes me torpid. But rap against the peeling frame of the screen door. He did not strike the frame with anything approaching true force. Nonetheless, he used a trifle more vigour than the occasion required. This was how he did things. Whether conducting a sensitive inquiry, bracing recalcitrant witness, or ordering the prawns at the steakhouse. He was a water buffalo floundering in the middle of a situation, seizing command and dominating by virtue of his presence. I made him wait longer than was necessary, to the same degree as his assault on my door was designed to set the tone and mood, although not too long, because sometimes my anticipatory juices out-wrestle my subtler nature. I was an old man, and thus tended to move in a deliberate mode anyway. This saddened me. I was afraid he might not catch my little joke. But I came to the door, blinking in the strong light as I regarded him through filtering mesh. Of course, I permitted a suitable quaver to surface when I asked after his business. This was when the big man smiled and rumbled a string of lies about being the land assessor, and a few sundries that I never paid attention to, lost as I was in watching his mouth, his hands, and the curious way his barrel chest lifted and fell under the crumpled suit. He gave me a name, something unimaginative gleaned from a shoebox or like so. The identity on his State of Washington private investigator's license read Murphy Connell. He had been an investigator for 11 years, self-employed, married with 2 children, a boy who played football at the University of Washington, and a girl who had transferred to Rhode Island to pursue a degree in graphic design, and owner of a Rottweiler named Heller. The identification was in his wallet, which filled an inner pocket of the bad coat, wedged in front of an ancient pack of Pall Malls. The big man had picked up the habit when he was stationed in the Philippines, but seldom smoked anymore. He kept them around because, sure as a stud hound lifts its leg to piss, the minute he left home without a pack, the craving would pounce on him like a hammer and tongs. He was not prone to self-analysis, this big man, yet it amused him after a wry sense that he had crushed an addiction only to be haunted by its vengeful ghost. Yes, I remembered his call from earlier that morning. He was certainly welcome to ramble about the property and have a gander for Uncle Sam. I told him to come in and rest his feet while I fixed a pot of tea, unless he preferred a nip of the old gin. No tea would be lovely. Lovely. It delighted me in an arcane fashion that such a phrase would uproot from his tongue. Sort of like a gravel truck dumping water lilies and butterflies. I boiled tea with these hands gnarled unto dead Maronia, and took my sweet time. Mr. Connell moved quietly, though it didn't really matter, nothing is hidden from these ears. I listened while he sifted through a few of the papers on the coffee table, nothing of consequence there, my large one, and efficiently rifled the books and the National Geographics on the sagging shelf that I had meant to fix for a while. His eyes were quick, albeit in a different sense than most people would understand the word. They were quick in the sense that as a straight line is quick, no waste, no second guessing, thorough and methodical. Once scrutinised and done, quick. I returned in several minutes with the tea steeping in twin mugs. He had tossed the dim living room and was wondering how to distract me for a go at the upstairs or the cellar. I knew better than to make it blatantly simple. He was the suspicious type, and if his wind got up too soon, well, that would diminish my chance at savour our time together. Christmas. This was Christmas, or rather the approximation of that holiday, which fills children to the brim with stars and song. But Christmas is not truly the thing, is it now? The sublime void of giddy anticipation of the gaily coloured packages contains the first and, dare I say, righteous spirit of Christmas. Shucking the presents of their skin is a separate pleasure altogether. But Mr. Connell sat in the huge stuffed lazy boy with springs poking him in the buttocks. It was the only chair in the room that I trusted to keep him off the floor, and it cawed when he settled his bulk into its embrace. Let me say that our man was not an actor. Even after I sat him down and placed the mug in his fist, those accipitrine eyes darted and sliced from shadowed corner to mysterious nook, off-put by the cloying feel of the room, and why not? It was a touch creepy. What with the occasional creak of timber and low squeak of settling foundation, the way everything was cast under a counterchange pattern of dark and light. I would have been nervous in his shoes. He was looking into murder's most foul, after all. Pardon me, murder is a sensational word. Television will be the ruin of my fleeting measure of proportion if the world keeps spinning a few more revolutions. Disappearances is what I should have said. 30 of them. 30 that good Mr. Connell knew of, at least. There were more, many more. But this is astray from the subject. We looked at each other for a time, me smacking my lips over toothless gums and blowing on the tea. It was too damned hot, as usual. He pretending to sip, but not really doing so on the off chance that I was the crazed maniac that he sought and had poisoned it. A good idea, even though I had not done anything like that. Since he was pretending to accept my hospitality, I pretended to look at his forged documents, smacking and fumbling with some glasses that would have driven me blind if I'd worn them for any span of time, and muttered monosyllabic exclamations to indicate my confusion and ultimate verification of the presumed authenticity of his papers. One quick call to the Bureau of Land Management would have sent him fleeing as the charlatan I knew he was. I ignored the opportunity. Mr. Connell was definitely not an actor. His small talk was clumsy, as if he couldn't decide the proper way to crack me. I feigned a hearing impairment, and that was cruel, though amusing. Inside of 10 minutes, the mechanism of his logic had all save rejected the possibility of my involvement in those disappearances. No surprise there. He operated on intuition, peripheral logic, as his wife often called it. I failed the test of instinct, half-blind, weak, pallid as a starfish grounded. Decrepit would not be completely unkind. I was failing him, yet the room, the house, the brittle fold of plain beyond the window interrupted by a blot ramshackle structure that was the barn, invoked his disquiet. It worried him, this trail of missing persons, vague pattern. They were hitchhikers, salesmen, several state troopers, missionaries, prostitutes, you name it, both sexes, all ages and descriptions, with a single thread to bind them. They disappeared around my humble farm. The Federal Bureau of Investigation dropped by once 3 years before the incident with Mr. Connell. I did not play with them. Winter had yet to make me torpid and weak. They left me with nothing, suspecting nothing. It was a close thing, that inconvenient visit. It convinced me that the hour was nigh. The tea grew cold. It was late in the year, so dying afternoon sunlight had a tendency to slant. Trees were shorn of their glory, crooked branches casting crooked shadows. The breeze nipped and the fields were damp. I mentioned that he was going to ruin his shoes if he went tramping out there. He thanked me and said he'd be careful. I watched him stomp around, doing his terrible acting job, trying to convince me that he was checking upon the value of my property, or whatever the hell he said when I wasn't listening. Speaking of shadows, I glanced at mine, spread out across the hood of the requisite '59 Chevrolet squatting between the barn and the house. A perfectly normal shadow, if a tad disfigured by the warp of light. A majority of the things I might tell are secrets, therefore I shall not reveal them whole and glistening. Also, some things are kept from me, discomforting as that particular truth may be. The vanished people. I know what occurred, but not why. To be brutally accurate in several cases, I cannot say I saw what happened. However, my guesswork is as good as anyone's. There was a brief moment, back and back again in some murky prehistory of my refined consciousness, when I possessed the hubris to imagine the measure of self-determination in this progress through existence. The rough beast slouching towards Bethlehem of its own accord, if leashed, then by its own device, certainly. Foolish me. Scientists claim that there is a scheme to the vicious tree of life. One thing eats another and excretes the matter another being requires to sustain its spark, so that it might be eaten by another, which excretes the matter required to sustain the spark, and like so. Lightning does not strike with random intent. Oceans do not heave, and toss axes do not ring in the Tulgey Wood or bells in the church towers by accident. As a famous man once said, there are no accidents round here. Jerk the strings and watch us dance. I could say more on the subject, indeed. I might fill a pocketbook with that pearl of wisdom, but later is better. Mr. Connell slouched in from the field, picking about for graves, perchance, resembling the rough beast I mentioned earlier. He was flushed, irritation and residual alcohol poisoning in equal parts. I asked him how he was doing, and he grunted a perfunctory comment. Could he possibly take a closer look at the barn? It would affect the overall property value, and like that, I smiled and shrugged and offered to show him the way. Watch your step, I warned him. It wouldn't do for a government man to trip over some piece of equipment and end up suing the dirt from under my feet. This made him nervous all over again, and he sweated. Why?